voted to leave the European Union. Now, we're going to avoid that argument like it's the plague and instead ask the question, why did Britain join it in the first place? First of all, when Britain made its application to join the EU in 1961, it didn't exist. Instead, it was the EC, the European Communities, which would eventually go on to become the EU. And the important body within this was the EEC, the European Economic Community, since Britain's primary interest was economic. It consisted of these 6 members, and some were much less keen than others on Britain joining. More on that in a bit, though. So Britain had previously focused its economic ties with its remaining imperial territories in the Commonwealth. Yet, as these nations began to shift their focus to other nations like the United States, Britain had to look for other markets. Britain had originally been opposed to any formal pan-European organisation of nations and felt that all that was needed was a free trade agreement. These negotiations for a free trade agreement fell apart pretty quickly, and when these 6 nations formed the EEC, Britain sat it out. Instead, Britain and these nations got together and created the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, which removed some of the barriers to trade with the EEC. And thus, Britain now had a choice, either remain as part of the EFTA, known as the 7, or apply to join the EEC, known as the 6. There was pressure to do this because Britain's economy wasn't growing as fast as the rest of Europe's, and there was a fear of being left behind. And thus, in 1961, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan went for membership. Now, applying to join the EEC didn't guarantee success, and for Britain there were 2 major obstacles. The first was the United States of America. Britain wanted to be sure that its membership of the EEC didn't contravene any American foreign policy. The second and the biggest hurdle was France, specifically President Charles de Gaulle. And in 1963, he vetoed Britain's entry into the EEC for several reasons. The first was that de Gaulle believed that Britain joining the EEC would weaken its ties to the British Commonwealth, which he felt were a vital part of containing communism. The second reason was that French-United States relations were pretty poor in the early 1960s. And thus de Gaulle was concerned that Britain would simply be a means of America directly affecting the way the EEC works. In de Gaulle's eyes, these 2 things combined meant that Britain would never properly commit to Europe in the way that, say, France or West Germany had. Despite being rejected, Britain didn't give up and instead did everything they could to make future integration easier. A reason for Britain's continued interest was a concern that financially it was too reliant on the United States. In 1967, Britain again made an application to join, and again Charles de Gaulle vetoed it. His reason for this was that he felt the British pound was too unstable and that Britain would need to devalue it before entering the EEC. Prime Minister Harold Wilson didn't want to do that, and so he went on the charm offensive. And so he got the most charming man he could find, Chancellor James Callaghan, to write articles in French newspapers claiming that the French would eventually come around to Britain's way of thinking and let Britain in, but fun fact, no. Wilson, for many reasons, devalued the pound, and so with that, de Gaulle's primary reason for not wanting Britain to join was gone, and he vetoed them again. This rejection, however, was condemned by the other members of the EEC, and to many in Britain it sort of felt like de Gaulle simply held a grudge. Now, Britain, not to be defeated, had 2 clever tricks up its sleeve. Number 1 was time, because de Gaulle wasn't going to be president forever, and sure enough, he wasn't. Number 2 was collective bargaining. In 1972, Britain made a joint application with Denmark, Ireland and Norway on the condition that if Britain didn't get in, nobody would join. And this time it was accepted by everyone, except by Norway, who then stayed in the EFTA. 3 years later, Britain held a referendum to confirm whether or not it would continue its membership, and this was overwhelmingly backed by the public. The European Communities would become the European Union in 1993. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with thanks to my Patreon supporters whom you can see on screen now. And with an extra special thanks to James Bisonet, Ike, Danny Maloney, Colin Castleman, Marvin Cassow, Rob Waterhouse, Aaron the White, Jordan Longley, Chris Wicker, Gustav Swan, Gareth Turner, Marcus Arsner,
Il est d'ailleurs sans honte de reconnaître notre défaite. Et que proposez-vous, monsieur le maréchal? On doit s'entendre avec l'Allemagne.
Monsieur le Président, vous ne pouvez pas laisser les Allemands entrer dans Paris sans la moindre opposition.
Mais nous nous battons, vous le savez bien, et nous perdons.
En langage militaire, ça s'appelle une désertion.
Je ne vous permets pas, de Gaulle.
Quoi que nous fassions, cette guerre sera mondiale. Décidons de continuer le combat ailleurs. Personne ne veut résister à la disparition de la France.
Je retourne cette famille à Londres.
volonté d'arracher le soutien de Churchill.
Not a chance. We must build up our own forces.
Ça t'apprendre ne reste plus longtemps. Il faut quitter la maison. Charles, mon grand amour, je ne sais pas où tu es. Je ne sais pas où je vais. Je suis dans la situation d'une mère qui doit protéger ses enfants et qui va pourtant prendre le risque de les entraîner vers la mort.
Je suis surtout un homme qui a tout quitté, qui a laissé sa famille dans un pays à feu et à sang.
Sachez que vous risquez d'être inquiété à tout moment.
Tu n'as pas le choix, tu dois continuer.
Les mots, ce sont les seules armes qui me restent.
La défaite française a été causée par la force mécanique, aérienne et terrestre de l'ennemi. L'action foudroyante de cette force mécanique a amené l'effondrement du moral, du commandement et du gouvernement. Devant cet effondrement, deux voies s'ouvrent de l'abandon et du désespoir. Elle menait à la capitulation. C'est celle qu'a choisie le gouvernement Pétain. L'autre est celle de l'honneur et de l'espérance. C'est celle que nous avons prise, mes compagnons et moi. Nous croyons que l'honneur des Français consiste à continuer la guerre aux côtés de leurs alliés, et nous sommes résolus à le faire. Nous espérons qu'un jour, une force mécanique supérieure nous permettra d'avoir la victoire et de délivrer la patrie.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter that stands out.
Okay, hi everyone. So now we got our nationalism all excited, all our emotional affect inspired by nationalist appeals. And of course, we're now in the era of nationalism with the Brexit happening in early last year. This is from September of last year. And Boris Johnson representing British nationalism in the Conservative government that is still in power. But before we do that, let's go to the cyber campus and go to attendance and do the attendance, smart attendance. And your smart attendance number is 603. 603 is your smart attendance number. So let me go back to the chat and put in 603, and that is the smart attendance number for everyone. And okay, so nationalism. You know, let me tell you a story. When I was at the American University in Bulgaria, we set up the first European Union studies program at that American University in Bulgaria that started, what, 30 years ago. And I was there when the new European studies program was being set up. And of course, everyone knew at the American University in Bulgaria that Bulgaria aimed to join the European Union. And so we wanted to set up a European Union study program because that would be very important and appealing to the students. So we sent out and we communicated with different people. And we sent out messages about, you know, what should be in a European Union studies program, a European Union studies major, a major area of study. And one of the elements of feedback or response that we got was that the European Union studies programs typically do not talk much about history before the end of the Second World War. They don't talk about what happened in Europe prior to 1945. Like, it's all focused on what happened since the end of the war and European integration. And there might be some reference to Adolf Hitler, but that's it. There's not much discussion. And this is, of course, this is 25 years ago. I'm hearing this, right? In the 1990s. So 25 years later, in 2021, we see all this uprising of nationalism in the United States, in Great Britain with Brexit, in Russia with Vladimir Putin. You see appeals to nationalist populism in China under the Communist Party under Xi Jinping. You see challenges to the establishment in France under the National Rally led by Marine Le Pen. And we see in Brazil the rise of populist conservative nationalism under Jair Bolsonaro. So with Brexit in particular, with the British vote to leave the European Union in June 2016 in particular, we really were confronted with the number about with the importance of nationalism, and that means the discussion of history. That means the discussion of history, right? That and one has to understand what happened up to 1945 to understand the attitudes that make for stronger nationalism in Britain and weaker nationalism in France, and much weaker but still important in Germany or Italy, and the British experience with nationalism, as I mentioned earlier, their experience with nationalism has not been as perceived as negatively as it was perceived, say, in France or in Germany, not to mention Germany or Italy. I mean, Adolf Hitler in Germany and Benito Mussolini in Italy, they were all about asserting and open about being nationalists and asserting their primacy and their dominance for Germany and Italy. That's right, as a rightful place that they deserve to have. And of course they were defeated, and Italy and Germany were devastated, defeated, and occupied, and humiliated, and embarrassed. But of course, the British never went through that phase, right? The British never went through a phase of defeat, and so it is important to keep in mind that from the British perspective, British nationalism has been a pretty good thing. It hasn't led to disaster the way German nationalism was seen as contributing to the Nazi Zeit, the Nazi period in Germany, or Italian nationalism was seen as being a route for fascism in Italy. It was not seen that way. And that's important for understanding how it is that as Britain in particular recovered from the rise of the United States and the comparative decline of Britain at the end of World War II, that as Britain became more and more economically vibrant in the middle of the Cold War, remember, in the Cold War, after 1945, the world now has nuclear weapons. So countries are not going to fight wars directly, not great powers, Britain versus Russia or United States versus Soviet Union. That's not going to happen in the form of direct confrontation, direct warfare. Instead, countries compete indirectly. They compete by, like, for example, intervening in the internal politics of the Korean nation during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union, United States occupied Korea and then divided Korea and then reinforced their allies, their respective allies in the Korean nation in the 1940s as the Cold War intensified. That's a form of competitive interference inside Korean internal political affairs, but that's very blatant, right? But of course, there are other forms of competitive interference by the Soviet Union and the United States, or specifically the CIA and the Soviet KGB, intervening everywhere in the internal politics of Italy, of Belgium, of course in Germany, because that was on the front line of the Cold War, but also in African and Asian countries, and answering positively the appeals of local actors inside Italy, or local actors, local political groups inside anywhere, Chile or Africa, an African country, asking for help from Washington against their local enemy. And they knew that the way to get help from Washington to help them against their local enemy was to claim that their local enemy is working for the Soviet Union. And of course, the Americans were concerned, as we talk about in the US foreign policy class, intensely concerned about the Soviet Union expanding its influence around the world as to try to create a Russian empire under the flag of communism. And that came to shape American foreign policy during the Cold War. And that was the umbrella situation under which the Americans really encouraged the Europeans and supported those Europeans that wanted to pursue integration. But the British were always most hesitant about that, partly because the British still had dreams and beliefs that they were a great British empire. And they, of course, now in the late 1940s, you can't have empires anymore because everybody's talking about human rights and national self-determination. So the British Empire became the British Commonwealth. The British Commonwealth. That they renamed the empire the Commonwealth, and they gave formal independence to India and Pakistan, and of course other countries also left the British Empire earlier, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not so peacefully, but still to this day, right? Australia and Canada are still formally part of the British Commonwealth, and still the head of state of Australia and Canada is the Queen of England. The Queen of England is still their official head of state. So if any of you go to Canada or Australia, I was in Vancouver, British Columbia for a conference, and I was jogging along the port there, and you see the flags at the port of entry for the ships to come in. You see a Canadian flag, you see and you see a British flag, a British flag. And this, I get as part of this rise of nationalism, this belief among intense Brexit supporters that Britain has other options, that Britain has the power capability to dream bigger dreams about being dominant, about being active, about being influential in the world without having to compromise and create a European actor, when Britain can still play its own leading role in the world by being Britain, not by being part of the European Union, not by joining the Eurozone, not by doing any of that. And so this is as a reflection of, as we said, of nationalism. And so we talked about this in previous class, right? Let me make sure that I'm sharing the screen. What is nationalistic behavior? Here is a discussion of nationalistic behavior, that nationalists will, they tend to, I described this earlier, right? They tend to overestimate their power, excuse me. They tend to overestimate their power capability, right? They tend to see the outside world in terms of threats and opportunities for the nation. Because remember, Britain or Korea or Azerbaijan or Belgium or Korea or Japan or United States, they only exist up here. This is the only place those countries exist. Those actors exist only up here in your head, in my head. And they're constructed there. And so, if you look down at the world from a spaceship, and you look down at Europe, for example, from the spaceship, and you look down at Europe, you don't see France colored yellow and Germany colored brown, Italy colored red, and Spain. You don't see a political map. You don't see that. That exists only in our heads. And a nationalist tends to understand the world in terms of that overarching understanding that they believe that there is such a thing called France, Germany, Italy, and that's how they understand the international environment, the world politics, the world situation. They also tend to understand the world in terms of threats, perceived threats and opportunities to the nation, to their nation that they belong to, France or Germany or Italy. And thirdly, they tend to overestimate their relative power capabilities. And again, the best example of a country overestimating its power capabilities, a nation state overestimating its power capabilities, is Germany under Hitler, right? Germany under Hitler actually acted as if it believed it had the relative power capability compared to the Soviet Union, United States, Britain, France, to conquer Europe and then the world. It's kind of crazy, but nation states tend to do that. They are more prone to engage in that kind of behavior. And you could make the argument that the British are prone in that direction, that they do not need the European Union. They do not need to pool their sovereignty and subsume their British identity in a European identity the way the British, the Germans do, or the French or the Italians, because they have other power capabilities that they can exploit, particularly those capabilities that derive from their glorious imperial history that was the British Empire and later the British Commonwealth. And that sounds silly, but it's not. It's emotion, it's identity. And you see it with Brexit. You see it as the people that supported Britain leaving the European Union believed that the European Union was responsible for Britain's identity being under threat by too many people coming from outside of Britain to live in Britain. For example, from Poland, at least 800,000 Polish people moved from Poland to Britain after Poland joined the European Union in 2004. And there's only 67 million British people in all of Great Britain. Almost, 1 million Polish people alone moved to live and work in Britain. And so you have a tremendous increase in diversity as a consequence of globalization. And for many people, that's great. They're doing well. They love diversity. They love globalization. They love travel. They speak foreign languages. But there's a large group of people in the United States and Britain and other countries that are unhappy. They are contemptuous and fearful of what all of these other people who do not look like them, who do not speak like them, who do not smell like them because they eat different kinds of food, who don't act like them, are coming and living next door to us. And of course, people who often come from other countries, not often, but many people come from other countries because of economic desperation or political suffering as refugees. They have a difficult time in adapting to their new home in Britain or the United States or France. And they don't, they're not going to get jobs typically as college professors. Some might, but most are not going to become college professors and doctors and business executives. They can't speak the language well, so they tend to be poor. And They tend to therefore be more likely to be living in areas where there's higher levels of crime. They're more likely to have higher levels of alcoholism and drug abuse. And if I'm a British nationalist or a German nationalist, or I'm going to dislike that. I'm going to blame European integration for allowing these people to come in from Greece. And once they get in from Greece or from Italy or from some country that has a boundary with Africa or Asia, sea or land boundary with the outside countries, they can come into my country because we're all part of the European Union and we have to allow people to move across borders in the European Union. And so you see so these emotional aspects about identity and nationalism are really, really important, not only for explaining, for example, how people vote in elections, but understanding, for example, international strategy, including economic strategy, including competition strategy in a world in which, as we said earlier, countries don't compete directly with each other so much among nuclear power countries, because it could lead to World War III, and that would be the suicide for everybody if we have another world war with nuclear weapons, right? So countries are competing indirectly through economic competition, through technological competition. You see it, for example, in vaccine nationalism. Who is the first to produce the vaccines? Who is the first in distributing the vaccines? Who is going to provide leadership to the world? And this began long before vaccine nationalism, right? I mean, probably the best example of indirect competition in the nuclear era to show and convince you, the Koreans and the Japanese and the Belgians and the Brazilians, what is the best country, was the U.S. Soviet Union's race to the moon, the space race in the 1950s and 1960s. I mean, that's a wonderful example of indirect competition in the nuclear era. We can't go to war directly, so we're going to show the world who's number one by showing who gets to the moon first. Right? And the Americans spent hundreds of billions of dollars, many hundreds of billions of dollars on that space program. Why did they do that? Just because it was a good idea? No, because they wanted to compete with the Soviet Union and convince you and me and everyone else that America as model is the best model. The American system is the best system, and you Koreans should follow it. You Belgians should follow it, or at least be allied with the United States. So because in this indirect competition, there's a stronger focus upon demonstrating that your country is modern, your country is cutting edge, your country is global, right? That your country is leading the world through technological and economic development. And of course, if you're small Korea with only 50 million people, you're not going to lead the world, but you want to be allied with the countries that are playing a prominent role. You want to be allied with the United States and play a critical role in the United States' efforts to, say, develop and manufacture and distribute the billions and billions of doses of COVID-19 vaccine that now have to be distributed around the world, right? Whereas North Korea, of course, threw its slot in with the communist model. And, the communist model, it had a lot of credibility in the middle of the 20th century under the Soviet Union. Remember what was going on in the 1940s? It was the Soviet Union that defeated Nazi Germany. It was the Soviet Union that paid most of the price of defeating the greatest evil the world has faced since ever under Adolf Hitler. Yeah, it was the Soviet Union that then rebuilt in 5 years. The Soviet Union had rebuilt from the destruction of World War II. So by 1950, the Soviet Union economy had recovered. And then the Soviet Union was the first to put a satellite into space in 1957, and then the first to put a man into space before the United States. And of course, the Soviet Union was saying, when communism came to the Russian Empire in 1917, 1918, the Russian Empire was devastated by the World War I. Then there was a terrible civil war that killed millions of people, so that the Russian economy was maybe 12% of its economy in 1922, was 12% of its size in 1914. The Soviet Union was an overwhelmingly agricultural economy when the Bolshevik communists came to power in 1917. And then in the space of just a generation, it became an industrial powerhouse. And then it was attacked by Germany, and it was devastated, and then we defeated Germany and occupied Germany and recovered in 5 years, and then put a first satellite into space and the first man into orbit. And this really appealed to a lot of different people, that if you want to become modern, you can choose the American capitalist way or the Soviet communist way. And we know what happened. Communism had lots of problems. Stalinism doesn't work beyond basic industrialization in terms of competing effectively. But North Korea is still trying to deal with that, because North Koreans don't want to accept that the South Korean model is better than their model because of Korean nationalism and the competition between the two. But let's get back to what's going on in the news today. So let me make sure we have time for our debate. And I talk about a lot of different things here, and I get really excited, and I got to remember that we have to cover what I wanted to cover here. And so here's something in the news today. Let me ask you a question. Please respond to the following statement. There's a conflict going on between US and Britain and France and Australia. And this is from the New York Times today, and Roger Cohen is their longtime reporter in France. It turns out remember we covered, let me open up that progressive, Trans-Pacific Partnership program, Wikipedia entry that I opened up last class, just to show you the context. So remember, Britain has now left the European Union at the end of January of last year, and Britain has now applied along with other countries. I think Thailand is applying as well, and South Korea is interested. Britain has applied to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the United States withdrew from, even though the United States originally supported it. And oh, by the way, I should mention also as well that China just applied to join this same organization. So make sure I show you this. This was in today's news. This is all current events. China applies to join the Pacific Trade Pact in a bid to boost economic clout. So China is also leading another economic organization, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Area. But here it says China has filed an application to join a comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. So will China be allowed in? Well, let's see. It'll be interesting to see if it's allowed in, if the other countries agree. At the same time that this is going on, and so it's a short news article. Britain and Thailand have also signaled interest in joining the CPTPP, and so just to show you that that's on the news report today. Let me go back to the other news report I wanted to show you. And this is also current events. This is breaking news. They announced here that United States and Britain and Australia announced that the United States and Britain are going to cooperate with Australia to help the Australian government develop nuclear-powered submarines. Nuclear-powered submarines, not submarines that have nuclear weapons, but submarines that have nuclear engines, nuclear power, not diesel. And France had been working with the Australians to develop submarines in Australia that were going to be diesel powered by oil, fossil fuels. And France was transferring the technology. Remember what I said about technological progress, right? You want to show if in the 21st century, your country is modern and leading by being technological cutting edge. And that means controlling the atom, nuclear power. Nuclear power, if you have nuclear reactors, if you have, not to mention nuclear weapons, you are considered to be modern, high tech. You want to be, and you want your nation to be respected. You want your nation to be prosperous and respected, which means for a lot of countries, that means that you have to develop your nuclear power capability. And so the French had been working with the Australians. They're speaking here, the foreign minister of France is angry, Jean-Yves Le Drian. is angry that reflected the fact that France had its own deal with Australia reached in 2016 to provide it with conventional, less technologically sophisticated submarines. Australia is going to pay $66 billion for those submarines and how to manufacture them and develop them. And Australia has pulled out. It says here, instead, France reacted with fury Thursday to President Joe Biden's announcement of a deal to help Australia deploy nuclear-powered submarines, calling it a unilateral, brutal, and unpredictable decision. France is attacking the United States. That resembled a harsh and sudden policy shifts common during the Trump administration. France is claiming that the Biden administration is acting in ways similar to Donald Trump when he was president. The angry words from Jean-Yves Le Drian, the foreign minister, in an interview with France Info Radio, followed an official statement from him and Florence Parly, the minister of the Armed Forces, calling the American choice to exclude a European ally and partner such as France a regrettable decision that shows lack of coherence. And this is interesting. The degree of French anger recalled the acrimonious rift in 2003 between Paris and Washington over the Iraq War and involved language not seen since then. So we talked about that at the last class, right, where the European Union never really recovered from that conflict between Paris and Berlin over George W. Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq in 2003. And Lidron says, this is not nice, it's not fair, you don't do this with your NATO allies, France. And it goes on and says, it's a knife in the back, Lidron said of the Australian decision, noting that Australia was rejecting a deal for a strategic partnership that involved a lot of technological transfers and a contract for a 50-year period. Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, did not even mention France in the video conference with Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, during which the deal was announced Wednesday, nor has France consulted on the Australian about face and the new agreement. And this looks like a new geopolitical order without binding alliances, said Nicole Bacrayan, an expert on French-American relations. To confront China, the United States appears to have chosen a different alliance with the Anglo-Saxon world confronting France. She predicted a very hard period in the old friendship between Paris and Washington. Keep in mind, from the point of view of this class, Britain was not able to join the European Economic Community until 1973 because the French, under Charles de Gaulle, president of France, said, "Aniyo, no." Charles de Gaulle said to France, to Britain's application in 1961. Britain applied to join in 1961, and de Gaulle, who was president of France, said no. And why? He claimed, and you see this repeated again and again in the literature, that he believed that London was too close to America, that London was too close to Washington, that London's allegiance, affections, emotional attachment was not to Germany and France, it was to their ally, the United States, their superpower ally, their cultural kindred state that was founded by British migrants that speaks English. He called them the Anglo-Saxons. Charles de Gaulle called Britain and the United States Anglo-Saxons. And he believed that if Britain joined the European Economic Community, Britain would not be primarily motivated by allegiance and loyalty to Europe, but would rather reflect or be an agent of American influence over Europe and France, because Charles de Gaulle wanted France to be the leader of Europe. It goes on here. Biden said the deal was about investing in our source of strength, our alliances, and updating them. For 100 years, there's been talk about the special relationship between London and Washington, that America and Britain have a special relationship that presumably has to do with their long-term economic ties, their cultural ties, the fact that United States elite is Anglo-Saxon, into which the core community was created, into which other Europeans have assimilated, like my father, right? So, I'm American. I can't even speak Italian. I speak English, right? Britain is a partner in the deal with the United States and Australia, another irritant to France after the British exit from the European Union and Johnson's embrace of the global Britain strategy, Boris Johnson, right? Aimed largely at the Indo-Pacific region. French suspicion of an Anglophone cabal pursuing its own strategic interest to the exclusion of France is never far beneath the surface. Wow. At a deeper level, the deal challenged President Emmanuel Macron of France in some of his central strategic choices. He is determined that France should not get sucked into an increasingly harsh confrontation between China and the United States. Rather, Macron wants France to lead the EU toward a middle course between the two great powers, demonstrating the European strategic autonomy that stands at the core of his vision. He has spoken about an autonomous Europe operating beside America and China. But he's not the first French president to say that. I remember 30 years ago, right? Francois Mitterrand, the president of France after the Cold War ended, and before, during, and after the Cold War, was writing and declaring he was really concerned about United States' ultimate intentions and that Europe needs to become more autonomous. They've been saying this for decades, and it never really goes anywhere in terms of developing a separate European military and military capability outside of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And of course, the European Union, however, is still trying to accommodate US and interest in the Indo-Pacific region. It notes here, the European Union released a long statement Thursday called the EU Strategy of Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, committing European nations to deeper involvement at all levels of the region. It said the bloc would pursue multifaceted engagement with China. They're going to cooperate and compete with China at the same time. And then presenting Europe's strategy, Josep Borrell Fonteles, the EU foreign policy chief, he's the vice president of the European Commission, and he is the high representative for the European Union Common Foreign and Security Policy, said in Brussels that the submarine deal reinforced the bloc's need for more strategic autonomy, for the European Union's need for more strategic autonomy. And they say this, they've been saying this for decades, since the Cold War ended. And Yugoslavia disintegrated into war, and the Europeans didn't act very effectively in dealing with that. But 30 years later, since the Cold War ended, will that happen this time? Maybe in a different way. As I said, countries are competing more economically and for access to markets. So my question to you is, please respond to the following statement. The increasing conflict with the Anglo-Saxon world over trade opportunities will lead the European Union to increase its economic cooperation with Iran despite US resistance. What do you think? Do you think that that the increasing conflict between Britain and the European Union, with Britain moving more towards the United States, the old British Empire, will cause France, Germany, and Italy to look for more economic opportunities to export and to invest and grow their economies with exports and make more jobs for their workers in France and Germany and Italy in Iran? Iran is a country of over 80 million people. It's a middle-level country. It's a nation state. Iran, you know, I know Maria, you know, it comes from Azeri territory. Iran is a nation state. It's a multi-ethnic nation state, but it is a nation state, sort of the way, for example, that Switzerland is a nation state. Even though Switzerland has French, Italian, and German Swiss, Iran is a nation state. It's not like Afghanistan. Iran is a powerful big nation state that is focused upon a territory and a Farsi and Azeri and Shia elements in their identity. What is an Iranian? An Iranian is somebody who lives in Iran, can be Azeri or Farsi, and is Shia Muslim. And they're a nation state. So that means, you know, Iranians think they're as ancient as China or Korea, that they've been around for thousands of years as a political community, like Greece or China or Korea, that they've been around. They're an ancient nation state. They weren't something created by the British and the Germans and the French and negotiating at the London conference, the Berlin conference that's dividing up countries, Africa into little different provinces that belong to France. No. That Iran has been around for thousands of years. It's a nation state. That means it's got potentially an effective government, that it will, and of course, it wants to have glory too. You know, you're going to tell Iran that, oh, Iran, you can't have nuclear weapons, Iran. You can't have nuclear technology because Iran, we, the Americans, believe that, you know, you're too cruel and barbaric, Iran. That's what we Americans and our allies say. Iran is too cruel and barbaric to be allowed to have nuclear technology, not to mention nuclear weapons and missiles. Iran responds, oh yeah? You supported the Shah of Iran, that CIA puppet, who was the most corrupt, vicious dictator in the 20th century, and you call us barbaric for what you did by putting the Shah, that corrupt CIA puppet, in power from 1953 until we overthrew him under Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution in 1978-79? Makes people angry to be told that they're too barbaric and culturally inferior to be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Oh, Israel's allowed to have nuclear weapons though, right? Despite what they do to the Palestinians. And the Americans don't complain about that. So let me divide you up into two different groups, and just automatically. And so those are the
Professor, I'm late for the class.
What?
I'm late for your class.
Okay, I already put the number in the chat function.
Okay.
So these are the two groups. So where do you fit? Communicate with each other and decide where you fit in these on this. Do you think that there's going to be more and more of a split between the United States and Britain on the one hand, and the Europeans, namely France and Germany and Italy on the other hand, to exploit the tremendous economic opportunities that are available in trading and doing trade and commerce with Iran, which the Americans up until this point have fiercely opposed. They don't want the world to do business with Iran. And of course, you know, this makes the Japanese and South Koreans angry as well, right? I mean, the South Koreans, they really like to buy Iranian oil, because Iranian oil is really high quality oil, low sulfur. And the South Koreans even built special refineries in South Korea to accommodate that need Iranian oil, because it's very good, high quality oil. And there's even an area here in Seoul, in the city of Seoul, called Tehran Avenue, named after Tehran, because during the Cold War, South Korea was doing so much business with the Shah of Iran under the Shah, when the Shah was in power from 1953 to 1979. And the Americans, of course, encouraged that. That was okay when the Shah was in power. And of course, the South Koreans had to give up all of those economic interests. I talked with one South Korean former foreign ministry official. Well, this must have been almost 10 years ago. I met him at my church, and he said he was based in Iran, and South Korea had all sorts of business in Iran, and then they had to give that up because the Americans pressured South Korea not to do business with Iran. And of course, China moved in and took over all of those opportunities away that South Korea had enjoyed. So join those groups, join your two groups, and decide where you are in terms of, I mean, again, there's no right or wrong reason. I want you to think about this in terms of what will be the consequence of this increasing British alliance with the United States. And you know, yes.
So the question is whether it's better that the European Union works together with Iran to like fill the gap of the Brexit.
Yeah,
that,
yeah. I mean, you know, in France and Italy, they have problems with unemployment. France and Italy had been major business partners. And again, it began under the Clinton administration, 1990s, the Clinton administration pressured France and Italy not to do any more business with Iran, because America said Iran sponsors terrorism. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. And so all of that, and Iran is one of the few big nation states that's an unexploited emerging market. It's a nation state, so that means it has tremendous power capabilities. It's big, over 80 million people, about the size of Germany. And it's a middle level. They've got technology. I mean, they did develop under the Shah. The Shah did seek to develop his country, and the American oil companies built the oil infrastructure that was originally in place in Iran in the 1970s. The American oil companies did that, and so it's got tremendous economic opportunities. And I'm telling you this because the Iranians have been trying to do this also for 30 years, trying to get the Europeans and the Japanese to separate from America so that the Europeans and the Japanese will exploit the tremendous business opportunities in Iran by enticing the Europeans and the Japanese and the South Koreans as well. But with the American military in South Korea, it's hard for me to imagine the South Koreans ever telling the Americans to refuse to do what the Americans insist upon. But the Japanese, the French, the Italians, are they potentially going to distance themselves from the United States, as the United States is now taking advantage and focusing on economic opportunities with the British, and the British are focusing on that? Do you think that this will lead to increasing effectiveness of Iran in attracting foreign investment? And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see what you think about that, because I also want you to be aware that that's what Iran has been attempting to do for years. That knowing that the Europeans in particular are desperate for more business and trade to export and make more money, provide more jobs for their people in Iran, in France and Italy and other countries, where they have this problem, as is covered in the textbook, with unemployment has always been a long-term problem in the European Union. Relatively high levels of unemployment compared to Britain and the United States. I mean, I think the French unemployment rate is still, around 10%. Same in Italy, although I haven't checked in a few months. United States and Britain, it's about half that. It had been before the pandemic. In Spain, it's much even higher. And that's a theme in your textbook. The European Union's effort to try to reduce the level of unemployment, to find more jobs for young people like you, right, who are looking for jobs. And it's difficult to find jobs because the European countries have strong protections for older workers who've already been hired. That it's very difficult to lay off or retire workers when you don't need them anymore. It's much easier in Britain and the United States. And so that's a main theme in your textbook. European Union dealing with unemployment and trying to demonstrate its effectiveness. Of course, everybody's focusing on the pandemic now, but that issue of unemployment, particularly as it affects young people in other countries like Greece. I mean, before the pandemic, the unemployment rate among young people in Greece was astronomically high among people your age. Greeks couldn't find jobs. They'd have to leave Greece to go to other countries to work to find jobs. Then the pandemic happened, and that changed everything. But doing business and trade with Iran, because Iran wants to buy lots of nice things. They want to buy lots of airplanes, Airbus airplanes. But the Americans say anybody who does business with Iran can't do business with American companies, can't do business with American banks, can't do business with American corporations, because Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. And the Europeans just sort of, okay, we need the American alliance. We have to cooperate with the United States. We're not happy about it, but European Union might fall apart if we oppose the United States. And the United States did show us how easily they could divide us, like they did in 2003 when Paris and Berlin attempted to stand up to the United States when they wanted to invade Iraq. And so let me show you else something else that's on Wikipedia here these Zoom bars get all the way here. So Infotex, I think it's Infotex. Wikipedia. So we go to show you here. I mean, here's Iran-European relations. Let me go back to the. There's a Wikipedia entry on all of the sanctions that the United States is pushing on Iran, because Iran is opposed to Israel, and you see there's a whole entry here on UN sanctions against Iran that the United States has been insisting upon, and the Europeans are very weak in standing up against these sanctions because they don't want to anger the United States, and I'm trying to find, oh yeah, here it is, Instex. It was Instex. So, for example, the Europeans attempted to set up another organization that would engage in trade with Iran by the European Union without using American dollars, because the Americans say, you can't use American money in doing business with Iran. You can't use American dollars in doing business with Iran because Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. And so if anybody uses American banks to transfer payments using American dollars, remember, the American dollar is the currency of the world, right? The world economy primarily runs on American dollars, on this. And so the American government says, any bank that does business with the American bank that does business with Iran, we're going to punish. And so that basically stops any company around the world, big company, from doing any business with Iran, because they all use dollars in some way, American dollars in some way. And so the Europeans attempted to get around that by creating an instrument in support of trade exchanges where they would not use American dollars, and it didn't go very far. The only time, because the Europeans weren't happy with what the Americans were doing, and it just basically didn't work. And it says here, on March 31, 2020, when the pandemic began, the first Instex transaction was concluded. It covered an import of medical equipment to combat the COVID-19 outbreak in Iran. The first one, it was in March of last year, even though it started in 2019. That's the extent of what the Europeans will try to oppose American sanctions on Iran. Now you hear the French saying, we're being stabbed in the back. We lost $66 billion contract with Australia, instead given to Britain and the United States are going to exploit this because the United States first gave nuclear submarine technology to Britain in 1958. So 4 years before I was born, the United States gave Britain nuclear submarine technology and shared with them so that Britain could build its own nuclear submarine fleet in 1958. And now the United States is doing it with Australia, which is part of the British Commonwealth, which still has Queen Elizabeth as its head of state. They're doing it with Australia and the British and the United Kingdom in this Australia, what are they calling it? US, UK, there's a term. They're announcing that US, UK, and Australia are going to cooperate closely in developing a security system and business in the Indo-Pacific region.
Sir,
Yeah.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
So you're basically saying that the solution for like if the European Union would work together with Iran,
yeah,
there could be created like a division because like you said, the US doesn't want to work together with like the barbaric countries, and they would
what they claim or call or label or stereotype, right?
So they would like stop other businesses from working together with Iran.
Right. When you already are stopping.
And Instex is a solution for that.
Well, it was, but they're not doing much with it. I mean, that's as much as they've done with it. They haven't really pushed this because they don't want to, apparently because they don't want to irritate the United States, because they think that the United States has is too important and has too much influence over Europe to risk making the United States hostile to the European Union. I mean, they did. Yeah. Mhm.
So basically, it's not good for the European Union to
Well,
work
do you
together
think
with
so?
Iran.
Or do you think that the Europeans will eventually mobilize the capability, the political capability to oppose United States policy towards Iran
That's really hard.
or towards
Question.
China? I mean, they're worried. I mean, you saw in those news reports that, by the way, I think Iran's biggest trade partner is China now. I mean, they're relying upon the Chinese to provide the vaccines, Chinese vaccines. I think you could check, but I think China is Iran's major trading partner. Iran has signed a long-term trade agreement with China because they can't sign. They haven't signed a trade agreement with the European Union or the United States, not to mention the Western countries in general. And that's because the United States pressure that the United States declared that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East and elsewhere. And so the and you know, they mentioned in that news report, I mean, this is before when you were just little babies, but like, for example, when they mentioned in this news report about how this language from 2003, it got really ugly language in the United States in 2003 when Paris tried to lead European opposition to the US impending invasion of Iraq in 2003. And there was talk, I remember reading in the Financial Times, there was talk in Washington about how Paris was stabbed the Americans in the back. That after all of the good things that the United States did for France in World War I, in World War II, and then helping rebuild France after World War II was over, and then the French stabbed America in the back. These ungrateful French people stabbed America in the back when America needs their support to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein in Iraq is developing weapons of mass destruction, and he's a danger to America and the whole world. They use that kind of language. And of course, the French know that the Americans use that kind of language. Stab a knife in the back. I mean, you know, when you get to be my age, 2003 doesn't seem that long ago. That's only 18 years ago. And there was talk in Washington about breaking up the European Union. That, well, you know, the claim was, there was speculation or the narrative was that the French would not dare have attempted to oppose the United States in the United Nations Security Council vote on whether or not to invade Iraq if it didn't have the support of other Europeans. So maybe the European Union is a bad idea. Maybe we need to disassemble the European Union if they're going to if Paris is going to use the European Union to oppose America's security. And it even got really silly. Like, for example, I don't know how you say it in French, in Belgian French. What is it, pomme de frites? French fries. We call them French fries in the United States, right? They have them in Korea. They call them porenchu praisu. How do you say French fries in Korean? Like at McDonald's, French fries? Well, they have them in Korea, and Americans call them French fries. I don't know why. And there was a call to no longer call them French fries, call them freedom fries, because of the anger at France for, I mean, really stupid, silly stuff. Or the Americans also make a breakfast involving.
I really don't get why it's called French fries, because from Belgium.
Well, that's what we call it in the US. But this congressman from, I think he was from Texas, he just died like last year. He was the one who was pushing it. We should call them freedom fries, no longer French fries, because the French stabbed us in the back. And there's a kind of breakfast food the Americans make with battered bread, and they fry it, and they call it French toast. And don't call that French toast, call it freedom toast. That's what he's referring to here in this news report. So now we're finally going to see, and of course, keep in mind, it was always Charles de Gaulle, the great leader, nationalist leader of France, who had opposed Britain joining the European Union, or what was the European Economic Community back then, because he doubted that Britain would be committed to it, and he was apparently right. Charles de Gaulle was right, and then Charles de Gaulle, of course, resigned as French president in 1970. And then when he resigned, the French government withdrew its objections, and Britain and Denmark and Ireland joined in 1973. So all of that comes up in this news report, an Anglophone cabal. It was how Charles de Gaulle thought. Charles de Gaulle didn't have a great degree of love for the British because he thought, France was treated very badly during World War II, including not just by the Germans, of course, but also even by the British, because I think in that news report, I mean, we started talking about nationalism here in today's class, right? And I showed this this video at the start of the class before.
쉽고 뜯고 맛보고 즐기 이게 바로 행복입니다. 아시죠? 이 가탕.
Let's show it again here.
La défaite française a été causée par la force mécanique, aérienne et terrestre de l'ennemi.
This is at the start of when Germany invaded France and defeated France basically in a week.
La défaite française a été causée par la force mécanique, aérienne et terrestre de l'ennemi. L'action foudroyante de cette force mécanique a amené l'effondrement du moral, du commandement et du gouvernement. Devant cet effondrement, deux voies s'ouvrent de l'abandon et du désespoir. Elles menaient à la capitulation. C'est celle qu'a choisie le gouvernement Pétain. L'autre.
So, when the Germans defeated France, they allowed the French to continue to control about 2/3 of the territory of France. And they put the capital of this new area, this new government, working with the Germans in a town called Vichy. So it's often referred to as Vichy France. It was a client state of the Nazi Germans. It was that part of France that was not directly under occupation by the German army. The German army occupied the northern coast with Britain, but the rest of France was still technically self-governing and from the city of Vichy. And Marshal Pétain, this is Marshal Pétain, the great World War I national hero who led the French army during World War I and saved France from being defeated by the Germans. He agreed to collaborate with the Germans after Germany had defeated France in 1940. So if you're a French nationalist, this is like, Pétain, Pétain is collaborating with the Germans. And he collaborated with the Germans because he didn't want the French people to suffer anymore. After the horrible costs of World War I. So this is humiliating to French nationalism. Marshal Pétain is a traitor collaborating with the occupiers of the hated Germans.
Est celle de l'honneur et de l'espérance. C'est celle que nous avons prise, mes compagnons et moi.
So de Gaulle is proclaiming himself the leader of the Free French, the French resistance. And he will go to London and cooperate with the Americans and the British and claim to be the leader of the French resistance, the Free French. But Vichy France still controlled the French Navy and the French colonies, right, of the French Empire, because the French government had surrendered. But the French government still controlled the Navy. And so Winston Churchill was prime minister of Britain at this time, and he was concerned that the Germans were going to take over the French Navy, the French warships. And so he ordered the British Navy to destroy the French Navy at sea and in ports, and destroyed and killed many French sailors. This is the British killed these French sailors in sinking the French warships so the Germans could not take them. So that, again, just humiliating awkward experience with the British and everybody in Europe, but including the British.
Nous croyons que l'honneur des Français consiste à continuer la guerre aux côtés de leurs alliés et nous sommes résolus à le faire. Nous espérons qu'un jour, une force mécanique supérieure nous.
And he would even, in 1967, de Gaulle went so far as to take the Britain out of NATO. That de Gaulle withdrew France from NATO in 1967 because it was, in his view, an insult and a threat to French sovereignty. So he pulled Britain out of the political system of NATO and made the Americans close their military bases in France that had been there since World War II. And the Americans took their military bases and soldiers and Air Force out of France. And then, of course, well, in the 1990s, France would come back in because they wanted to have more influence over the US and the rest of Europe and NATO. So France is back in NATO now, right? But now you're seeing this conflict again emerging between London and Paris and the United States. The question is, will it lead basically to some kind of far-reaching changes? I highlight this news report because we've been hearing for decades, many years, statements by European leaders that European Union needs to develop its own autonomous military and security capability away from NATO, separate from the United States and NATO. And they need to have more strategic autonomy, but they've been saying this for over 30 years now, and it never happens. Do you think it's going to happen now, particularly with this need for economic recovery and the need desperately to give jobs and to Europeans who have this high levels of unemployment, when Iran is a land of great, tremendous economic opportunity that's relatively close by to Europe. So again, I just want to hear your thoughts on this. So let me go back to the site there and ask you, did you join those groups?
No, because you were explaining the whole time. I stayed here.
Okay, please go back to the groups and tell me where you are, where you fit on this. I have to remember that when I have the group open like that, you can't really see. So please join the group. So Maria and Owen Tech are room 1, and Kang Tomun and UJE in group 2. Please join the groups. And I'll flip a coin and I'll write a statement as well.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I think I have to come out for a while and reassign the group, please. My computer was suddenly turned off, so I was out of the.
Okay, I'll assign you to room 1.
Class.
Okay, you're in room 1.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so let's go back to breakout rooms. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. I just want your thoughts on this. Okay, so heads, it is room 1, and it is heads. So heads, Maria will speak. Tails, Own Tech will speak. And it's tails, so Own Tech. What did your group? Where do we fit your group on this scale of agree or disagree?
We cannot decide correct side because I think Iran can't replace the scale of Americans' economic, and the cooperation with Iran will make a serious bad relationship with US.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's other opinions that after listening your explain,
Okay.
make it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, I mean, I'll wait before I tell you what I think. Let me now go to the second group, and heads Kang Tong-un or tails UJE will speak. And it is Kang Tong-un, where do you fit on the scale?
In my opinion, at first I chose a neutral, but I've changed my mind. I think the EU would increase its economic cooperation with Iran. Because as Professor said, South Korea buy the oil from Iran as well, but it's all. US did not take restrictions on South Korea. It means buying and trading goods are just economic cooperation, not a military cooperation. So the US would not take seriously about the economic cooperation such as trading each other. So I think I agree.
And Marie, what is your position?
Okay, so first I was pro that they should work together with Iran, but after the arguments that you said, like the US sanctions, I was like a little bit calm. So I think I'm like between both. But as you said, Iran is already working together with China, and China is like a big partner. So if they already have China in their pocket and they work together with other countries, I think they could like oppose the
you think
US
the French
sanctions.
and the Italians and the Germans could work through China to do more business with Iran?
Yeah, so if they all work together, they can like go against.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah.
You really don't want to. They're really not going to irritate the Americans by opposing American sanctions on Iran. But what they might do is work through China, because China is their biggest trade partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At least it is with Germany, and create European subsidiaries and so on. Work with the Chinese. But the Americans are very sensitive. I mean, they tried to arrest the. They're trying to extradite the daughter of the founder of Huawei in Canada. I can't remember her name, but she's the daughter of the founder of Huawei, the big Chinese telecom company. She was flying through Canada and Vancouver, and the Americans attempted to have her arrested by the Canadians and extradited to the United States because they claim that Huawei was doing business with Iran, banks with the Iranian banks in ways that involve violations of American anti-terrorism legislation. So they wanted Canada to arrest her and send her to the United States and put her on trial. And so the Canadians arrested her, and now she's waiting in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada, to find out whether or not the Canadians will extradite her to the United States to be put on trial for her company doing business with Iran. And of course, the Chinese are furious. So what they have done is they've arrested 2 or 3 Canadians on made-up charges and are holding them as hostages, as leverage to make the Canadians give up this woman who lives in a big rich house in Vancouver while she's awaiting the decision by a Canadian judge. Really weird, ugly behavior is underway right now. But just to show you how sensitive the Americans are to companies doing business with Iran. So I still, there might be ways around that. I don't know. I mean, I haven't really researched it to find out how companies can do business with Iran through China in ways that won't irritate the United States.
I saw like earlier that the big 3, like Germany, France, and UK, like in the past, I think 2003, they were working together with Iran.
Yeah.
Like on some sort of, I don't know, some pact, like, I don't know on what grounds, but is that changed now that because of the Brexit? So
well, not since Brexit. Brexit happened and then the pandemic started. So the world has now been in crisis since the pandemic. So everything has been pretty much frozen in terms of international trade negotiations as the world is trying to recover, and the focus is on what to do with the vaccines and why the American sanctions are preventing. Are American sanctions on Iran preventing Iran from getting access to medical equipment that it needs to fight the pandemic? And what I heard is that the Iranians have to rely upon Chinese vaccines, and the Americans are not punishing the Iranians for delivering, or trying to punish the Chinese for delivering vaccines to Iran. But it's a problem. Like, for example, the problems in Lebanon right now in terms of the economic depression in Lebanon and the crisis there. Getting economic relief to Lebanon is very difficult because American sanctions on Hezbollah, which they claim is a terrorist organization, Lebanon's Hezbollah, which is supported by Iran. So there's all these problems of getting economic aid to Lebanon in the midst of the pandemic and the economic depression and the crisis there because of American sanctions on Hezbollah in Lebanon. So, but I think that I think there's as much chance the Europeans are going to respond to what the Americans have done with Australia as much as, I mean, South Korea, they didn't want to give up doing trade with Iran, but as I recall reading over the years since I've been here, they gave it up because the Americans insisted. The Americans have pressured the South Koreans not to import Iranian oil. And the South Koreans kind of resist, but eventually they give in because America's got this other bargaining leverage in terms of its military commitments and security commitments in terms of it. So they give up, they acquiesce. Talking about the Seoul government. And I think the Europeans will as well. And the Americans might compensate the French in some other ways, maybe by agreeing or supporting, maybe having China join the comprehensive and progressive trade Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, that it just applied to join today. Or maybe have France play a more active role economically in the former French colonies in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. I mean, I don't read much about French investment in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, even though it used to be part of the French Empire. Maybe there is, but I haven't come across it in reading the New York Times. So they'll find a way. And again, the French will grumble, like they always grumble. For the last 30 years, they've been grumbling and complaining, but they never do anything. They never stand at the United States.
Wouldn't it also be like a good idea for other countries to work together with Iran to like develop more nuclear power?
Well, they are. I mean, but again, the companies, corporations all want to do business with the United States. United States banks, United States companies, access to the United States market for their exports. And America says, if any company does any business with Iran, they cannot do business with American banks, companies, or they can't export to the United States. And so they have to choose Iran or United States. And they always choose United States. And the French government and the German government and the European Union never mobilize their political capabilities to support their companies in opposing the United States. They don't want to oppose the Americans because they think they need the Americans to deal with Russia and Ukraine and to keep NATO in place. And they have this inferiority complex. The European Union exists significantly because of American influence. And that would be a major step to have a hostile, conflictual relationship with, maybe not hostile, but conflictual relationship with the United States like China has or France. That would be a major, major, implausible, very implausible situation. So they'll probably just acquiesce. And the French will complain about being stabbed in the back, and the Americans will probably find some way to give them something else, But that is the American commitment to the Anglo-Saxon world. Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Canada. I mean, those are in intelligence agencies. They're called the Five Eyes. These are the 5 intelligence services: US, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand are called the Five Eyes. They engage in intense, close sharing of intelligence information by their secret intelligence agencies. And it's 5 countries. That's why they call them the Five Eyes. They trust each other so much that they share highly classified intelligence information that they each gather. They don't do it with the French. They don't do it with the Germans. They do it with the other English-speaking countries. Well, I shouldn't say not English-speaking, white English-speaking countries, because Nigeria, their national language is English, but they're not part of the Five Eyes. And Scott Morrison said, well, we'll develop nuclear submarines, but we're not going to have nuclear weapons on our territory. But, well, we'll see. Okay, so let's do a vote. And the reason I mention this, just to highlight why these questions are important. Maybe the United States is a major threat to world peace. Maybe the United States wants to expand its influence and control over the world in the name of democracy and human rights. I mean, the United States has hundreds and hundreds, several hundred military bases all over the planet. Before Joe Biden became president of the United States, one organization calculated the United States drops 72 bombs every day somewhere around the world. 72 bombs a day. How many bombs is China dropping around the world? America's at war was at war in Afghanistan. It's at war in Iraq. It's at war in Syria. It's at war with drones and bombing. 72 bombs a day. And so if the United States is a problem, what is the European Union going to do about it? Are they going to contain or move towards containing Washington? Can they do that? And over the years, they grumble and complain. Francois Mitterrand says things, other countries say things, but they never do anything. Other than, say, well, we have to develop strategic autonomy, and that's it. Of course, China and Russia, Beijing and Moscow say, yes, you're right, the United States is the problem. They're the threat to world peace. They're the ones that wants to create an American empire, global empire, a Pax Americana. So let me now go to the Cyber Campus vote. And of course, it says I'm disconnected, so log in. And all right, so please vote. And let me make sure you can see that. So let me share the screen here. So please vote on whether or not the increasing conflict with the Anglo-Saxon world over trade opportunities will lead the European Union to increase its economic cooperation with Iran despite US resistance. So please vote. So we need a couple more votes. One more, okay. So neutral cannot decide, disagree and agree. Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's, we should do our debate. We have to make sure we do our debate on the debate topic question. And we go here to South Koreans adopting the European Union. The name European Union was a political mistake. And so let me divide you up into groups. Well, and let me form 2 breakout rooms. So recreate and let me assign manually. And all right, so in room 1 will be pro. And room 2 will be con, the debate topic. And assigned to pro, we'll put UJE. And assigned to con, we will put Own Tech and Kim Tong-un. And I don't see Kim Tong-un. Where's Kim Tong-un? Kim Tong-un, are you here today? Own Tech, where do you want to go, Own Tech? What happened?
Yeah, I'm con.
Okay, but I got you there. Marie, do you want to be pro or con?
But do you mean like the name European Union in general?
Was a mistake, yeah. Adopting the name European Union was a political mistake. Do you want to be pro or con? You want me to sign you? I'll flip a coin. Pro, heads your pro,
Yeah.
tails your con. And it's heads your pro. And Kang Tong-un, you want to be, you're con, Kang Tong-un.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we'll make Maria pro because we need to have this balanced. Okay. So prepare your statements. Join those rooms and as to on the debate topic. And if you wrote a paragraph, you are prepared to speak and practice your English. And so talk with each other. UJE will speak for pro. And let me flip a coin, we'll see who speaks first for con. Heads, it's pro, it's Kang Tong-un. And it's tails, so Own Tech will speak first for con. But everybody will get a chance to speak. And heads, I am pro. Tails, I am con. I'm con. So let me prepare my statement. Okay. Okay. All right. So who's going to speak first? So let me close your rooms here. Okay, UJE, you're speaking first. Pro always goes first. So you argued that adopting the name European Union was a political mistake, UJE. So UJE, please turn on your video so we can see each other. Okay, UJE, where is UJE? UJE. UJE, okay. So you speak first for Pro. You argue it was a mistake. Why was it a mistake, UJE?
In my opinion, on the topic of the discussion is the opposite. The early doubts had been raised by the Korean War. Europeans had initially been heartened at the US-led invasion to expel North Korean invaders from the south, but were then alarmed by the invasion of the north, which prompted on intervention by China and threatened to generate Soviet hostility. It is hard to believe that initially doubts were raised from the Korean War. The number of troops alone shows a lot in South Korea and less in South Korea and more huge in North Korea, worrying to find a country but failing to conclude countries to have a great influences on Asian issues.
Okay, but the European Union was adopted as a name in 1993. So this is 2 years. This is 40 years after the Korean War is over. The Cold War is over, right? The Soviet Union breaks apart at the end of 1991. They sign the European community signs the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, and it comes into effect in 1993. Why was it necessary to keep moving forward with integration when the Soviet Union and the Cold War were done? Why?
Because they have no power.
The Europeans have no power unless they create a European Union?
No, Korean European Union.
Well, Korea, I mean, again, the point is you're saying that China is a new threat that the Europeans had to respond to because the Chinese were rising, so there was a new threat in the European Union to respond to China? That's why the European community became the European Union in 1993?
maybe I
What do you think, Maria? Why do you think it was a mistake to adopt the name European Union? Because that whenever you read the academic work on European skepticism, Euroscepticism, and the rise of hostility to the European Union, it begins with the Maastricht Treaty. When the European community becomes the European Union, it's telling everybody in the world that we're trying to aim towards becoming ultimately something like the United States of Europe. And if you're a French nationalist or a British nationalist or a German nationalist, hold it, we don't want to create a United States of Europe. We don't want to subsume being French and subsume being Italian and subsume being German and create this new stew, mix them all up in this new stew that we're not going to call the European Union. What is that? What is that? Do you think it was a mistake?
I don't think it was like a really political mistake, because it has like brought a lot of advantages in like the economy worldwide. But yeah, it's quite a hard question, and I think I need more time.
Well, Maria, you said your family comes from Azerbaijan. Do you still have any relatives there?
No, it was Kyrgyzstan and Russia.
Okay, Kyrgyzstan. I think Kyrgyzstan said, I recall in the 1990s, they said, yeah, someday we want to join the European Union too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I say European Union, does that make you think, oh, Europe, it's modern, it's prosperous, it's high tech, it's democratic, it's a wonderful place, and we Kyrgyz, we want to be European. Is that what happened to many Kyrgyz? Do many Kyrgyz or Russians or Kazakhs feel that way? Because this was the kind of language that I heard in the 1990s that, well, yeah, we want to join the European Union too. And then the French said, now, wait a second. We can't let everybody who wants to join the European Union join the European Union. You have to be part of Europe. And they said that, then they said Kyrgyzstan is not part of Europe. Sorry. But Turkey, maybe.
No, yeah, it's hard. Like, yeah, I have a lot of family still living there, but they didn't tell me like what they think of Kyrgyzstan joining the EU. So I don't know what they think of that, but I think it would be good if they joined the European Union rather, and then like be a part of the US, I think.
I mean, there was even talk about maybe, how can you have Europe without Russia? Isn't Russia part of Europe? Shouldn't Russia be able to join the European Union? And there was talk about that under Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s. And then Putin emerged, and that pretty much stopped. And so Putin is now promoting his Eurasian Union. In opposition to the European Union, there's a Eurasian Union that's supposedly be dominated by Russia. And the term in Russian they're using now to describe this greater Russian world was Ruski Mir, the Russian world, that supposedly includes, I guess, Central Asia and Ukraine and Belarus, the Ruski Mir. And there's been talk about a Eurasian Union. But it stands in opposition to the European Union, partly because the European Union looks so pro-American, so closely allied to Washington. And Moscow doesn't want to, Moscow feels like Britain. We won World War II. We won World War II. We're not going to become a second level power like Germany, obeying the United States. Oh, yes, almighty Washington, we, Berlin, will do whatever you want, or Paris or Rome. No, they won World War II. They have the right to equal status with the United States and China on this world. Because they tend to think that the European Union basically, like I said, this is a coin, right? On one side is NATO, and the other side is the European Union. And the European Union really doesn't do very much to convince people that this is not true, despite words every once in a while, in my estimation. So let's go now to Khan. And that is Own Tech will speak first. Own Tech.
Sorry for Professor, but his microphone was broke. So can I speak?
Yes, you can.
Is it okay? Okay. In my opinion, European Union pursued the referring to the name European itself, so it's not a political mistake. First, in 1958, the EU pursued economic integration. After that, this period is called the Golden Age of Growth. Also, after economic integration, the European Union sought toward monetary union as well. So they fixed the exchange rates and created a single currency, euro, in the Maastricht Treaty. In this treaty, also EU pursued the political union. So I think it's not a political mistake. Also, Europe faced many problems in 20th century, but I think European community solved the problems together. However, professors say the several countries, for example, UK Brexit, it's out the EU. I agree that the powers in the European community helped the other Europe's countries in the frame of the EU. In this case, I think that's a bummer. However, I think there must have been a way to minimize damage to developed countries and help other countries in the process of pursuing a union.
Well, I mean, they were trying, I wrote also a con statement as well. So let me read to you what I wrote. Adopt, and remember, I wrote con because I flipped a coin, and it came up con. So I could have written pro as well. Here's con statement. Adopting the name European Union was not a mistake, because all of Europe needs to know that the European Economic and Monetary Union that began back in the 1970s, right? Economic and Monetary Union would require close and constant political cooperation in order for it to succeed. If it fails, if the Eurozone fails because of Brexit, Greece leaving over its sovereign debt crisis, or Ireland or some other country leaving because of unable to pay its debts, the way Greece was not able to pay its debts until the Germans and the other countries came up with 300 billion euros to loan to Greece, a country of 10 million people, right? If European Economic and Monetary Union fails, then it would be a catastrophe. So it must not fail. So everyone who wants the benefits of the Eurozone has to make the permanent commitment to make it work. You can't just be in favor of it now and then change your mind, a year later or a new government later. No. Because if it fails and everybody adopts the euro and then Greece leaves, it will be a catastrophe for Germany, France, United States, China, the whole world, because of the interconnections of the global financial system. So it must not fail. So everyone who wants the benefits of the Eurozone has to make the permanent commitment to making it work. Once you're in, you got to be committed to making this function, making this successful. And it will require close cooperation, coordination, and collaboration of the national monetary and fiscal policies of the member states. And adopting the name European Union permanently reminds everybody that this is what you are getting into if you join the Eurozone. So far, 19 countries have joined the Eurozone. Britain never joined. Tony Blair was prime minister under the Labour Party in Britain, and he wanted to join, but he couldn't get the British to agree. And he said, well, we'll have a referendum on it, on joining the Euro. And they never had a referendum, and then they ended up leaving the European Union anyway. Right? And And the world believes that the euro is real and Europe is real. And, you know, I think I mentioned that critical time that demonstrating that fact to everybody was during the Greek sovereign debt crisis. Let me see if I can find this Mario Draghi's big bazooka. When he made his statement that the European Central Bank will do whatever is necessary in order to make sure that Greece will never leave the Eurozone, that Greece will get as much loans as necessary from the European Central Bank to make sure that it never leaves the Eurozone. Here's one of the many different kinds of news reports came out at that time. This is from, it was 2012. Oh, anyway. Well, this is Mario Draghi pulls out his big bazooka, and it succeeded, as we talked at the beginning of the class, right? The beginning of the semester, the European Union in June of this year began selling euro bonds, hundreds of billions of euro bonds, and people are buying them. Investors are buying them and buying them with low interest rates. In other words, they're confident in it, that economic and monetary union is permanent and it is real, and therefore the euro is real. It's so real, it's a boring investment, boring, safe, low return investment. Not quite as boring and safe as the German one, but almost. Certainly.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Is it possible for Greece to leave the EU, like if they still have debts?
Well, anything is possible, but they're not leaving, and part of the explanation has to be because certainly the Germans and the other countries don't want this to fail, right? Mm-hmm. And the Greeks don't want to leave, but that was the critical point, that to convince you and me and all the bankers and all the investors that this thing is for real, and you can invest in it, big money, and it's safe. In other words, it's so certain, it's low risk. And so if it's low risk, you get low profit because it doesn't, it's not a risky, it's not an uncertain opportunity. And that means you have to call it the European Union. And you're not really in the European Union until you join the Eurozone. So all of those countries that are not yet in the Eurozone, like Poland, Czech Republic, even Sweden, Bulgaria, Hungary, in their treaties to join the European Union in 2004 and 2007, I'm talking about the former communist countries, it stated that they are making the commitment eventually to join the Eurozone. They've officially committed, formally, that they will, when they're ready, when their economies are prepared, that they will join the Eurozone. Bulgaria, yes, please let us in. Please. The Europeans, no, you're too corrupt. Your country is so corrupt, and we're not going to let you in, but please, you want in? No. I think Croatia will be next to join because Slovenia is already in, and Croatia's pro-German. They love anything German, and that means they love the euro because it's based upon German monetary policy. So I bet you Croatia will join the Eurozone as the 20th country next. I told you Lithuania was the country that joined most recently 6 or 7 years ago. And they're on the front lines of opposing Russia and also trying to show their usefulness to the Americans by standing up to China, little Lithuania. But I would think Croatia's next. I mean, they're just no problem. Yes, give us the euro, man. Woo! Danke Deutschland. Okay, so let me. That's what they were saying because they give credit to Germany for recognizing them as a sovereign independent country when Yugoslavia was breaking up, when France and Britain didn't want to recognize them. Germany said, we're going to recognize them. We don't care what you, France and Germany, France and UK want. We're going to recognize Croatia and Slovenia as independent states. And that was an act of German nationalism. So even the Germans can be nationalistic. And that was controversial because that may have made the war worse in Yugoslavia. Some people say it didn't make any difference anyway. The war was inevitable, but people argue about this, that the Germans themselves can also act nationalistically despite European integration. So please vote. So 2 of you think it was not, 1 thinks it was neutral. Anyone else? One last chance. 1 more voter. But I memean, one of the benefits I like about doing these kinds of exercises is because in order to work with you, I have to think through my own ideas. So this exercise has really reminded me just how critically centrally important that neo-functional spillover argument about the Eurozone and creating the economic and monetary union for the Eurozone. That's critically the core of European integration. Economic and monetary union to create the euro. That's 80% of what the European Union is all about, the euro. And once you're in for good. Okay, that's all for today. I will end the class and I will post the recording. Anybody got any questions? If not, bye.
Professor?
Yeah.
Do we have classes in?
Yes, thank you for asking me. I want to have class because there are other holidays coming up and the university insists that I meet with you, 45 hours during the semester. So they say, even if you have a holiday, you got to make it up somewhere. And so there are other holidays in October, and then in November, I'm supposed to go somewhere for a conference, my first travel. So we will meet on Monday.
And the American history have a classes too?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.